Okay. So that is the announcement of test 2 on Monday, the 15th on all of the Flask material. All right. So the SQLAlchemy that we started Monday is the new stuff. So not on the test. So up to 15 session cookies on the test. This week, SQLAlchemy not on the test. And so we'll be work on continuing our exploration of SQLAlchemy. Are there any questions on previous labs before I start new stuff? No. All right. So the first thing I have posted here is a video. And what the video is, so we're working now with a, we gave up the interface for the moment, so we're not doing Flask, though in the virtual environment that I set up on Monday in lab 16, I did install Flask. So I made a new virtual environment, I installed Flask, and then I installed SQLAlchemy. And we want to get the SQLAlchemy going before we bring the interface back in. So I set up for there to be an interface eventually, but we don't have that at this stage. And also on Monday, most of our work was done in an in-memory database. So we were writing records just to memory, and then sort of when we stopped, they disappeared. And maybe in one of my examples, I had an actual sort of database file. But we want to be able to look at that database and sort of on our own rather than querying it. We want to look at the database. And that's what this is about. So there's a Visual Studio Code extension for looking at a SQLite database. And those instructions are sort of like how to install it, how to use it. Well, you install it basically. I already have it installed, but let me bring up code. And let me close stuff, and then I will bring myself in code to my new virtual environment for Flask and SQLAlchemy, which was SQLA_stew. That's the one. That's where I test stuff. Where I test your stuff and test my stuff, and then I have a different one for sort of keeping stuff. Okay. But that is the VNV I want to open. And then if you don't have it, I do have it, but if you don't have it, you can open up the extensions and say you want to go to a SQLite. And here it's got this, crazy Alex CVZZ thing, but it pops up first. So there's a reason it pops up first, because it's a standard one. And this is the world of open source. So this is like an open source language, and that means anybody can contribute. So this Alex person, he's not a company or anything like that, but he wanted this thing and he contributed it, and it was useful, and so it's available and people use it. And it comes out first in this search because it's a popular one. But again, that's the world of open source for you, is that when we said it's install Python, it came up as Microsoft, because the companies contribute to open source, but so do individuals. Okay, so you can see by my little gear here, I already have it installed, but you know how to install those things. You would just, if you didn't have it installed, it would be this blue install button. You would click it and you let a minute or so go by and it's installed. Okay, so that is installing it. And again, there's also that video. And then I want my Explorer back. I want my Explorer back. That tells me sort of where I am. Here's my VENV. And I'm going to do Control Shift P, Control Shift P. And then I want, and you can see it's at the top of my list because I've searched for it before, but SQLite. And I want to open a database. And then it will ask me what database. And right now I only have the one sort of in this vicinity anyway, and that is an art database. Okay. So, and then I can right click on that and say, show the table. And this is the sort of the schema, if you will, of the database. So this is telling me, here's the code, here's the SQL code to create the tables. But then if I go down to this, expand this, then there are going to be two tables in this database. This is the database we're going to be making in this later today in my examples. But I can then, here, this database has two tables, painters and paintings. And I can right click on a table and say to show that. And so here are my painters. And right click on paintings and do that. And I can also query over here and so on. Usually I just want to see the databases. I think I inserted, did I? Okay, oh no, there's the record, okay. So I don't do much querying here, but I do, it is a nice viewer to make sure, because if you just go out into the world, and if I find that file, 341, SQL stew, VENV, there's my art database. If I try to open that, it says I don't know how to open a database. Let me do my trusty Notepad++. Well, it's all sorts of crazy crap, you know. Somewhere in there, you probably find things you know. Oh, here's Gustav Klimt from Austria. But it's mostly stuff you can't read and doesn't make sense. So that's why you appreciate the viewer that Alex CVZZ has provided for us. Okay. So again, if that was too fast for you, one, I'm recording, so you can watch me again, or you can watch this guy, this YouTube video, and he'll tell you how to install it, how to use it. He also shows some queries. I don't find it very useful. I don't tend to query in this. I usually just see if what happened, did my Python code succeed or not, is more what I'm looking at. Okay. On Monday, we installed SQLAlchemy. We made a table. Well, actually, SQLAlchemy made the table for us. We wrote Python code. We wrote we used SQLAlchemy, and we sort of wrote a class, and then we sort of said to SQLAlchemy, make the corresponding table for us. So we didn't actually write any SQL to make any database. We didn't go connecting to SQLite or anything like that. We just, the SQLAlchemy handled that for us. So it did most of the SQL. We just said, we defined as a class the sort of thing we want. I want these type of variables with these types, and that sort of also corresponds to what we have over in a database table, and SQLAlchemy made it for us. And we made a sort of a single table database. So not much of a database. There's not much you can, you know, if your database is a single table, there's not much difference between that and, you know, a CSV file or a JSON file, something like that. We want something with a more complicated structure. So we want a database with multiple tables with relationships between them. So that's what we will start today. Okay. So my example is painters painting paintings, and I already have it. So one thing I want to do is delete that database because I'm going to make it and it's already made. So I'll end up duplicating things and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to delete that database. And then I'm going to open, let me pull down the first version. I have like 3 versions of this and I probably have the last one open. Let me open instead the first one. Okay, so close this, copy this. And this one's just a Python file, that's all. I'm going to copy it. And then I'm going to put it in my folder here. And I'm going to replace what I had before, and I'm going to open it up. And okay. So here are the imports, most of which we had before, but there's 2 new things. So we had the create engine, we had that on Monday. We had the declarative base, we had that on Monday. We had columns and integers and strings, we had that Monday. Foreign key, that's new. We're going to have 2 tables, and one of the tables is going to be related to the other through a foreign key. And so that is a new thing that we are importing, foreign key. Session maker we had before, but another thing we're going to import is a relationship. So we're going to have a relationship. That relationship is going to be realized through a foreign key. So those are the 2 new things we're bringing in our imports. Here I'm setting up the database. I just have the // without a file name. That means I'm making for now an in-memory database. Once I get myself going and I'm sort of comfortable, then I will switch over to the file version. But for now, I'm doing the in-memory version. Set up the declarative base. Okay, so here's some database explanation in case it's been a while since you had database. We are working now with a one-to-many relationship. So how does that go? And get used to this language because I will insist on it. So you will have homeworks where I say state your relationships, and I will have a project and I will say state relationships. And if you don't, usually I'm like lax, and if you do it and it works, I'm happy. This is one thing where it's like, you must do it my way. Okay. So when I ask you to state a relationship, you must state it in both directions. And you must begin with A. And so each entity, you have 2 sentences. You have to talk about the relationship in both directions. You must start it with A, and then one of the entities, and then A, second sentence A, and then the other entity. And then you decide whether it is one or many in the statement. So I'm saying a painter creates many paintings. So that's clear. I'm not going to call somebody who paints just one painting in their life a painter, but a painter is going to make many paintings through the painter's career. So a painter. So start with one entity is painter, the other is painting. I start with an A. So in each version of the sentence, I start with A and then one of the entities. So a painter creates many paintings. And then I say my other sentence, a painting is created by, and then I decide one painter. I'm not allowing in my database for any work to be done by multiple painters. So that's just a decision I made. That may not be true in the real world. Maybe my database isn't sophisticated enough, but that is what I've decided that my data is going to have that format. So I'm only going to attribute a painting to one painter. Sometimes in the Renaissance, the workshops, lots of people worked on a painting, or sometimes somebody died. It was a big painting and somebody died and somebody took it over. but I'm going to attribute it to a painting. I'm going to attribute it to one painter. Like, I don't know, fame wins, so it'll be the most famous painter if it was made by more than one person. But this is the way I want you to write your relationships. And then if one of those sentences has the word many and the other one has the word one, then it's going to be a one-to-many relationship. If you write the sentences this way and you can put the word many in both of them, that's a different kind of relationship. And we have to do things differently. But so today we're keeping it easy. We're doing the one-to-many relationship. One of our rules of database, if you remember your rules of database, is that you have these, I don't know, fields or cells or columns, these things in a database, and you want to put one thing in there. In each record of a database, each field of each record has a bunch of fields, and each field you want to put a single thing. So to make this relationship, when if you can't have a paintings column for a painter in a database because there would be many painters in it, and you want each record to be one thing. So you would not put a paintings property into a database for a painter, because that would violate your sort of isolation kind of rule in a database, that you should have in a cell, in a field, you should have one thing. But you can do it for the painting. We made the assumption that the painting was painted by just one painter. So when it comes to the painting, we can have an artist field or a painter field, and only one thing goes in there. So that's a basic rule of databases, and therefore we need to know if we are doing it right. Okay, so we need to know, we wouldn't make, now I'm not in a database, I'm in code that's making a database. So one time when I'm in the painter, I'm going to talk about that it has a relationship to painting. But when I'm in painting, I'm going to say it has a foreign key to painter. So I'm going to, it's not an even relationship. Because of this one-to-many, it's not the same on both sides, and so it gets handled differently. Okay, if we are in pure database, you wouldn't see any sign of paintings in the painter table. But over here in code, you will. We will make a reference to the fact that a painter has a relationship to paintings. In a pure database situation, if you were just looking at the painter table, you would have no idea that there were paintings with a relationship to these painters. You would have to look at the paintings, and then it would be clear there was a relationship. Okay. If you remember your database stuff, that's all review. If you don't remember your database stuff, again, I'm going to have homework assignments where you have to tell me relationships. I'm going to have a project where you have to tell me relationships. And I'm very insistent that you do it my way. I'm usually flexible. I'm not flexible on this. Okay, so here is my painter class. I give a name to my class. It's extending their class that makes tables. I say that the name of the table is painters. So when I open up this SQLite database over here, it's going to be painters. Okay, if I said poop here, then it would say poop over there. Just controlling the name. This just controls the name of the table in the database. I say then a painter is going to have an ID, and then it's a primary key, and then it's an integer, and then it can auto increment. I don't have to explicitly say it's auto incrementing, but if it's the primary key and it's an integer, it's probably going to auto increment. My painters have last names and first names and countries. They have birth dates and death dates, and they have a relationship to painting. This is the one side of the relationship. This is the painter has many paintings. And so I say, this is just my name for it, paintings. And then I'm saying that there's a relationship to painting, which comes next. So now here's my painting class. I'm saying it has a table name of paintings. It has an ID, which is the primary key. So I'm going to have an ID for a painting. I'm going to have a title for the painting. I have a file name. I'm not doing anything with those files, but I have a file name because I stole this information from some other place and I had file names. And then and now here's the foreign key. This is the other side of the relationship, but this is the relationship where I could actually see it in the database, because a painter ID is a single thing. So a painting has one painter, and so I can put in the painter's ID. And it is an integer, and it's a foreign key that's connecting me to painting.id, painters.id, and we refer to the database there. So it's not capital P painters, but it's little p painters, and it's .id. That was the name. That's from the database. Okay. So now we have, before we just had one class, now we have two classes with this one-to-many relationship. You've got to know who's the one and who's the many. Here I'm just hard coding. This is what I'm going to get rid of later on, but I am hard coding this painter. So I'm making Edouard Manet, who's from France, and these are his dates. There is a date type in databases and in SQLAlchemy. In Python, there are date types. But computer dates are very sort of relatively modern, in that they might start in 1970, or maybe they go back to 1900 or something like that, but they don't go back much farther than that. I can't, so these dates, and although they're legit dates, I'm not sure they're legit dates that the computer would understand. So I just made them strings. Okay. If you were doing more of a transactional database and you wanted to know, like, what day did somebody order something on, then you would use the date type. But because I'm doing something historical and I have some old dates that a computer wouldn't understand because of the way they handle dates, I just made the date strings. Okay. I am adding the painter. After I add the painter, I want to add some paintings by that painter, and so I'll need to know that painter's ID. And so I did a flush, and that's sort of saying, push that through the system, and that will allow me to find Edouard Manet's painter ID, so I can use it as a foreign key in the paintings table. Okay. So now I have a painter, and now I'm making a painting. And here's my painting. Its title is Le Déjeuner Célèbre. Its file name is déjeuner.jpg. And then in a separate line of code, I've assigned its ID to be a painter.id. So this is me establishing the foreign key. And then I added the painting, and then I added another painting, and another painting, and another painting, and another painting, and I added all those paintings, and then I committed it. So sort of write it permanently to the database. So the flush wasn't a commit. If it died after the flush, but before the commit, it wouldn't be in the database. But the flush allows me to at least go through at least the extent of the auto increment and get an ID. So the purpose of the flush was to force an auto increment to get me an ID, but it's not the same as a commit, which puts everything into the database. So now I have at least this one painter and some of his paintings in the database. And so I'm in a position to query. Here's me querying the painter table. So I'm using my session to query the painter table. In general, that will give me many records. I only have one record in there, but in general, this sort of a thing will give me multiple records. So it's going to hand back a list, but I only want to grab the first one. And then, so I made that item and I'm showing the item ID and last name and first name. So I'm spitting out stuff about Edward Manet. And then here I am querying the other table, the painting table. And I'm filtering it. So I have the comment in the next version, but filter is sort of like, if you remember your SQL, like a where clause. So go through the painting table and give me everything by the painter with an ID of 1. That's all I have in there right now, but again, it doesn't know that. And then grab all of the results from my query and loop through them and show me the ID and the title and the file name and the painter ID. So there is Edward Manet, and there are the paintings by Edward Manet. Okay, so I just did 2 separate queries. I did a query of painter and a query of painting. I have not done a join. I have not done a join. I have not put these tables together in a query. I've just done 2 separate queries. Query the painter table, query the paintings table. So keeping it easy for now. We'll get to a join. And we'll use the relationship. You would use the relationship in the join, but we can also use the relationship in code to say, I don't need to do a join because that's a SQL thing. And all it does is realize, most of the times the join just realizes a relationship. And so I'm just going to use the code relationship and work with it rather than an explicit join. Though at some point I will write a more explicit join as well. Questions? In the spring, nobody had questions, and then like 75% of the people did it wrong. If you have questions, ask them. You're probably not the only one. Still no. Okay. I'm just going to add to it. Now I'm going to, I wanted more painters and paintings, and I happen to have that in some JSON file. So I'm going to get the information from a JSON file. You've probably seen this JSON file before. Okay. That's not what I want. Delete that. Copy these. And VE and V. And paste. I'm replacing. Okay, so now I have a new. Yes, okay. So now I have, now I'm reading from a file. So this is the same. I still have, I'm defining painters, I'm defining paintings, sessions, I'm creating. Here I am now, instead of hard coding Edward Manet, I am reading that JSON file. So I have a JSON file, and where did I put it in? Static, in data, and there is this data file. I can format it, make it look a little nicer. So I have an object that has a property painters, which is an array. Then that array is of objects or dictionaries. If I'm talking Python language, key value pairs. One of them is paintings, and that is in turn also an array or a list of objects or dictionaries. Okay, you've seen this file before. So I am importing JSON, I'm importing the operating system, I'm getting myself pointed in the right direction, I'm reading the file, I load it up and interpret it in terms of JSON. I'm reading through the artists. So I'm looping through the art is the name of my JSON file. I'm going through the painters, and I'm making a painter, last name, first name, country name, birth date, death date, adding the painter in Flushing. So I'm getting, I'm adding artists, and with the flush, I'm grabbing their IDs. Then before I leave this loop, everything's indented. So while I still have an artist, I'm starting a second loop of over that artist's paintings. So now I'm going over art painters. I'm working on the ith painter and looking at that artist's paintings. And I'm looping through the paintings and adding them to my painting database and assigning that artist as the foreign key and adding that painting. And then when I'm all done, I commit and put all that data in my database. Okay. I am querying the second painter. So I'm querying the painter table. And I'm looking for the ID to be the second. So I'm looking at the second painter. And then, strictly speaking, I'm querying a database, and that could be, that could give me multiple records. The ID was a primary key, so we know it won't give us multiple records. But in general, a query could give us multiple records. I say I only want the first one, and then I'm showing the information. So this will be my second painter. And then I'm looking at my painting table, and I'm filtering this time on the foreign key being equal to 2. So I'm finding my second painter's paintings. I'm going to look at all the paintings, and I'm going to loop through them and show the title. And I gave myself some nicer headers here. So here's my painter query, my ID number 2. My second painter was Georges Seurat, who's from France. And then I did a painting query, and starting with painting with an ID of 6 and going up to an ID of 11 were Georges Seurat's paintings. And so here's their title, and here's the file name, and then here's the painter ID. Questions? Okay. So again, filter, instead of just querying the table, I queried the table with a filter, and a filter is like a where clause in SQL. So you're limiting what you want to see. I want to see, this is like, if I were over the database, it would be like select star from painter, or actually it's painters in the database, where painter's ID equals 2. Okay. Last version, I'm just going to add some more queries. So it's just everything I had before plus a little bit more. So more queries. I like to build up, so that's why I keep redoing the same thing, but building up. So this actually the static's the same. I didn't change the data. But let me paste in the new Python and make sure I have the new one. One thing I did was switch over number 7. So now I'm making an actual database. I have my definition of painter. I have my definition of painting. I have my session. I'm reading JSON. I'm using that data to make painters and paintings. I have the painter query where I'm grabbing the second painter, who is George Seurat. And here is my query of the painting table with the filter of George Seurat, the painting ID of equal to 2. That's the old stuff. Now, what's the new? I added some queries. What are the new queries? I'm going to redo this query in just a different way. So now I'm going to say, I'm doing the second artist redo. So this first part is the same. I'm going to painter and I'm filtering on painter ID equal to. But instead of going over to the other table and using the same ID, but as a foreign key, I am saying I have an artist right now. Let me go through that artist's paintings. Paintings is, I said, so here I am in 98, referring to artist paintings. If you remember way up here in my class painter, I said I have something called paintings, which is a relationship to painting. And that's what I'm exploiting down here. Back down into 98. So when I did it the first time, I queried the painter table, and then I queried the painting table. Now over here in code, and let it do the SQL for me, I queried the artist, and then I exploited the fact that that artist had a relationship to paintings. And so I'm effectively doing a join, but the SQLAlchemy is handling the join for me. I said the artist had a relationship to paintings, give me that artist paintings and show me the work, show me the title of the work. I have other information. I have the file names, I have artist IDs or something, but all I asked for this time was the title. But I'm not explicitly jumping to another table. I'm using the fact that the code knows there's a relationship. Okay, this time I'm listing artists that are from France. So I can have filters that aren't primary keys and aren't foreign keys. So I want you to know that that's not the only kind of filter you can have. So this query, I'm filtering where the country is France. So I said, look at the painters, filter on the country being France. I did the all right here in the same line instead of making it 2 lines. And then I looped over the artists who are from France. And this is going to give me all the artists who are from France in my database. Okay, so filter doesn't have to be a primary key, doesn't have to be a foreign key. And again, we have code and we can do some in SQL. There's like enumeration stuff in SQL, but we also have our code version of things. And so instead of doing some kind of count in a SQL statement, I'm going to do the sort of counting over here in code. And we know how to do that. That's if we have something that is like a list or something, we can find its length. So I got here, I queried all the artists. I'm looping over all the artists, and I'm showing their first name and their last name, and then the length of their paintings property. So the paintings is connecting me to the second table, the paintings table, and that is getting me all that artist's paintings. And then I am just asking here for the length. So I'm doing that numerical stuff that you can do in SQL, but I'm doing it over here in Python instead. Okay. So here is just, this first part is the repeat. There's me going to the painter table and asking for ID of 2. Here's me going to the painting table, asking me for the foreign key, the painter ID to be 2. Here's me redoing it. Here's my second artist, and then here is the paintings property of that artist. So it handled that relationship. It handled that join for me. Here are my painters from France. Here is all my artists and the number of paintings that we have in the database. Okay. So part of the point of this is to have it handle the database stuff for you. So there was a join relationship between painters and paintings, or there was a relationship between painters and paintings. And if I were doing that as a query, I would have a join. But I can just say over here in Python, there's a relationship and let it handle it. There's a way to do sort of enumeration and such to do numerical stuff in SQL, but we can do our numerical stuff in Python. And again, and my other sort of extra thing right here, right now, is that filtering is not limited to primary keys or foreign keys. So those were my example. Let me show you what you have to do, which is pretty much the same, but just you pick up a topic. So you're just gonna pretty much duplicate what I did, but for your own data. So you have to come up with something that has a one-to-many relationship. Something like an item in a category. So you can say, I give some examples, and I also sort of put out this sort of statement that I like that tells me that it is a one-to-many. So if I say that an athlete is going to play just one position, that may be an assumption, that may not be true, but that's the assumption I'm going to put in my database. And then, but that position might be filled or played by many athletes, then if those are the assumptions in my database, then that's a one-to-many. If I say that a movie has one genre or it belongs to a primary genre, then a movie has one genre, but a genre has many movies or encompasses many movies. That would be one-to-many. If a Pokemon has a type, and it has just one type, but that type, there are many Pokemon of that type, so the type contains many Pokemon, then that is one-to-many. So come up with some one-to-many relationship, and then come up with some properties of the two entities. If it's a category, you might want to name the description, and then probably an ID, and that's good enough. Make some JSON file like my painter data JSON, but with your data, and then make the tables, read the JSON file, do some kind of query. So basically copy mine, but put in your data. But it's important when you're copying to know what to change and what not to change. That's the whole point. That's why it's so much just do what I did. Doesn't seem like there's much to it, but you have to learn what things are always the same and what things you'll need to change. Okay, I'm done. Anything for the recording? Any questions for the recording? No, you never do.